Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone from cold Madison, Wisconsin. We welcome you and we thank you for joining us for today's event from the CNI Colloquium. My name is Sam Aguirre. I am a second-year graduate student in the doctoral program and a member of the CNI Colloquium Committee. On behalf of the committee and myself, I welcome you to today's panel, Navigating the Job Market Beyond the Tenure Track. Before we get started, there's a few announcements for everybody who's joining us today. Please note that this event is being recorded and is going to be shared on the CNI Colloquium webpage. You can access that webpage from our website, but I am also going to drop the link here in the chat in case you are interested in watching the recording again in the future and following up with the Colloquium Committee. Another reminder, I will ask that you hold your questions until the end. We have set aside some time for Q&A, so you'll have an opportunity to engage with our panelists and with our facilitator during that time. Additionally, captions are enabled for today's event. If you find those necessary and useful, please go ahead and turn those on your end. You'll find them along the bar at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, Sarah Schaefer, our Associate Director of Career Education and Advising at the School of Education Career Center, has shared a couple of resources with us to support you if you are in the process of navigating the job market. I am going to drop that link to a Google folder that has these resources here in the chat. I'll be sharing those resources again towards the end of today's panel, and we'll be sure to get those posted on the website so that you can follow them and be able to use them as well. That being said, I thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to send it over to YJ Kim. Dr. YJ Kim is going to be our facilitator for today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and thank you all for joining, and thank you for all our guests who carve out this time for our CNI students to talk about careers beyond academics. One of the kind of motivation behind this colloquium series is that we know that a lot of our students are thinking actively about life after finishing PhD, although getting there is also very hard. And I remember as a graduate student, you only hear or you interact with only professors, so you think that that's the only kind of option after you graduate. But the reality is there are so many options. There are so many different ways that you can explore your career pathways in your life after you finish your PhD. And that's why we gather amazing speakers here today to hear how their journey has been. And we're hoping that our guest speakers share their wisdom, so we can and our CNI students can also figure out their own journeys as well. So no further ado, I'm gonna start with introducing our. I'm gonna kind of go with the order that I see on the screen. So Emily, do you want to introduce yourself and the organization you're working for in your current role? And just a little bit about who you are.
Sure. My name is Dr. Emily Schindler. Sorry, I didn't realize my background was blurred, but once I unblur my background, you might have a little more sense of where I work. So I work at the Comic-Con Museum in San Diego, California. I am for those of you who might not know what Comic-Con is, San Diego Comic-Con is a long-standing comics and popular arts convention. So you'll often see probably like the most famous thing that comes out of Comic-Con is we do the Marvel panel every year at 5 p.m. on Saturday of Comic-Con, where Marvel announces all of their movies and things like that they're going to be releasing, all of their big fan announcements. And, we have similar panels by like DC and other entertainment companies. But the convention actually started as just like a bunch of like super nerds getting together and talking about comic books. And so they've now opened a museum here in Balboa Park, and I am the director of ed. I'm originally from Wisconsin. I went through the PhD program that you all are in. Erica Halverson was my advisor for life. And yeah, did I cover everything, YJ?
Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Dixie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dixie Ching. I am a researcher at Google. I started about 6 years ago at Google working on a learning product. They didn't know what they wanted to create. They just needed somebody to get in there and go into students' homes and tell them what homework looked like. And I was supposed to be there for 3 to 4 weeks as a temp researcher while the lead researcher was transitioning and going on vacation. But we had never apparently gone into students' homes. And there was a lot of like questions lawyers had. So it took a while to do the consent form. So it took so long that the researcher who was on leave came back. We hit it off. She convinced me to stay at Google, and I've been there since. I transitioned from those teams working on learning products to working on Google Classroom. And then now I'm working in the Chromebooks division. So working on the Chrome operating system, as well as trying to make sure Chromebooks keep getting better and better for everyone who uses them.
Thank you, Dixie. Claire.
I can't believe I'm following like a Josie and the Pussycats doll reference and Google. Like this is going to be way less interesting. But hi, my name is Claire Donovan-Skane, and I am the founder and lead staff developer at CDS Literacies, which is an organization dedicated to building leadership through literacy. I'm an independent coach, literacy coach and consultant, working with schools, districts, organizations, specifically looking to consider and reconsider anti-racist and anti-bias literacy practices. I am situated in Evanston, which is right outside of Chicago. And my PhD work was at UIC with Emily Machado. Taffy Raphael was my program advisor, and Becca Woodard was my dissertation advisor. And that's how I arrived here today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. And Mariana.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mariana Castro, and I'm currently serving as Deputy Director for the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, which is a center that has over 100 different research projects. We're like a service unit that helps both academic staff and faculty who are interested in going for a grant do all the management of that grant. I'm also working part-time for a project called the Discussion Project, which works with faculty and 6 through 12 teachers to think through how to engage students in discussions. Discussions that are equitable around topics that might be difficult or around complex content. And when I got my PhD, I got it in curriculum instruction. My work over the last, I would say 16 to 20 years has been around multilingual learners and how they use language to make meaning of the world around them. So I've worked with Sam at WIDA, and I spent about 16 years doing research and development related to teaching and learning and policy. And now I'm focusing more on research back to research on teaching and learning.
Thank you. So we have prepared a set of questions for our panel. And, you know, when you hear my question, just jump in, and we don't need to go with the order that we just spoke. The first question we have for our panel is, what was your thought process about your career after your PhD, and what was your kind of journey to your current organization in relation to that thinking process?
Well, I can get us started. I started as a teacher. Things have kind of happened to me, and I've been kind of planning in action, not planning on action. And I started about 31 years ago. I was a teacher at a local school district. I had been there for 16 years. And when I first got into the US, the reason why I went into teaching is because I came as a 20-year-old. I had none of my schooling West transfer. So I put myself through school by working as a paraprofessional in schools. So I work with students with significant cognitive disabilities, very physical work. Then I started working as a paraprofessional, bilingual resource specialist with teachers. And then I got my degree in chemistry. And then about maybe 6 months into it, I had been married. So we decided to have a family. Both my husband and I had gone through school together. So we were like, phew, we're done, let's start a family. And when my child was born, my husband at the time just felt he wasn't ready to be a dad. So I was left as a single mom with a chemistry degree, and I just had no idea what to do. And because I had been working in schools, I decided I'm gonna go back and become a teacher. At least I will have more flexibility. So I became a teacher, a chemistry teacher, and because I was bilingual and I had been a paraprofessional working with students who were multilingual learners, I decided to, a lot of the students who were multilingual learners were coming to my school. So that's when I decided to to get a master's. So again, it was kind of life going through, and I was invited to work at district level to coordinate a bilingual program. And at that time, I loved working with teachers, but I didn't necessarily love all the paperwork. I really liked the interaction with teachers. And at that time, I heard that there was this small project called WIDA. It has 3-state consortium, and they said, we need someone to do professional learning across the country. And I was like, whoa, sign me up, because I love traveling. I love working with teachers. And I did that. And as I came on board, again, kind of life happened. And they were like, are you interested in doing a PhD? So I took one class at a time. It took me 7 years to get my PhD, but I did it. And when I see that things were kind of falling into my lap, and it wasn't until I finished my PhD that I was like, okay, I really need to figure out what I want to do. Do I want to go into academia? Do I want to not go into academia? I tried and I didn't get the position. And, when you're going to academia, you need to try 100 times. You need to be really comfortable with failure from that perspective. But then I realized that I just loved the work that I was doing. I was collaborating with multiple people, and I made the conscious decision of not going into academia, which, when you've been working towards your PhD in an R1 institution, people go like, really? You don't want to go into academia? But I was very happy with my decision, and I've been just enjoying work here at WCR. The consortium grew to 40 plus states. It's still here at WIDA, but through the connections that I've done, I ended up spending 1 year in curriculum and instruction coordinating ESL. I was invited to serve as deputy director now like 4 years ago, and it's just provided me with a very rich experience as a PhD without being in academia, but kind of being a cousin in academia.
I can follow up a lot of aspects of Mariana's story. I can echo in my journey. I started as a classroom teacher in Chicago Public Schools, and I worked in Chicago Public Schools for about 10 years in primary grades, and then later in middle school, majority of time spent in middle school, and became part of an organization called the Chicago New Teacher Center, or CNTC, which at that point was housed out of University of Chicago. Marv Hoffman and some of the folks there kept just bringing teachers into my room to sort of see how it was going. And I just love talking to new teachers about practice and how hard it was and how important it is to have mentors, and got just more and more interested in the idea of being a teacher mentor, specifically in Chicago, where there is such high attrition rates for really high quality teachers, especially teachers of color. So then I worked at the Chicago New Teacher Center, where I was able to work with a team of coaches and really trying to stem the attrition rate and keep really good teachers in classrooms for more than 3 years. And we took that scale in Chicago Public Schools, and then I started looking for other alternative experiences. I missed the culture of a small school and being part of a school community. So I shifted and became a school administrator in a small public charter in McKinley Park called Namaste. And we I was charged with sort of building out the middle school. So we had built from K to fifth grade, and I was the head of the middle school, charged with really building out a middle school and sort of best case scenario. If you can do it in one small place, what would it look like? So after we graduated our 8th grade class, I also was building my own family and had a child, looking for something to do that wasn't leading a building very far from my house. So I stepped back from that a little bit, but in those experiences had built relationships with principals in across the city of Chicago who kept asking for literacy PD, just like a one-off PD. Like, can you help my teachers understand small group instruction? Can you help my teachers understand diverse text, like how to build diverse text, where to find, how to write a donor's choose, like little things like that. And slowly that became more and more of my repertoire. And at that same time, I was sort of joining in the cohort at UIC because I really felt like I'm a learner and I wanted to really focus on something really specific. Something that I saw in my classroom and as we built out the middle school at Namaste was this sort of disconnect between the mentor text and text-based discourse we had in our classroom and linguistically diverse students, right? So where they saw themselves within the literature and where they saw themselves in sort of standard language practices that were okayed in school spaces. And that sort of disconnect led me to my dissertation work and working at UIC with Taffy, and then later with Becca. And when I was working with Taffy Raphael, she has a dear friend, Kathy Au, and she would refer to Kathy regularly as her friend that wasn't in the academics, that was actually in the real world, working in schools, but publishing. And then I was like, say again? Like, what? Tell me more. Like, and the fact that she lived in Hawaii did not hurt at all. But I had an opportunity through my program to communicate with Kathy several times and really hear that, like, okay, like you could actually work alongside your academic colleagues and have a really full career where you are contributing to the research, contributing to the larger body of work, and working in schools and working with children. So I would sort of credit Kathy Au's rogue move as one of the really impetuses to me moving into the work that I do today.
Thanks. Dixie, Emily?
Sure, I'll go next. I'm hearing a lot of similar things from my fellow panelists. It's really cool. Trying to think about what would be kind of interesting to talk about here. I think I went to graduate school later in life. I kind of felt like I was too old to go to grad school, but I kept thinking about it. So at one point, I'm like, let me just do it. I was really interested in science communication. I was a biology major and did lab research, decided to go and instead of going into a PhD program, decided to get a master's in science journalism. From there, I ended up working at a place called the Center for Children and Technology, doing research. But I actually saw that people, there was a change in sort of who could get grants and how likely you were able to get grants, so that people without PhDs just could not get grants. And I could see people at soft money organizations getting let go because they didn't get a PhD. So I decided to change jobs and get on a different track. So I very luckily, very fortunately, was hired by a wonderful man named Michael Levine, who was starting a new center connected to Sesame Workshop, and it's called the Joan Gans Cooney Center. I don't know how I lucked into that. I answered a Craigslist ad, if you can believe it. And I didn't even, when people ask me, where are you going? I'm like, I'm not really sure, but it just sounds really interesting. And we were tasked with building it from 0 to 1 in terms of like, what should it be called? What should our charter be? I learned a lot from Michael. But then again, that idea of like, you're being seen increasingly as an expert in children's media, and yet you have not done like the proper schooling in my mind. So at some point I decided to leave And finally, even older than, the first time I thought I was too old to go to grad school, I finally went to grad school. And Mariana, you were like, it took me 7 years. I did one class at a time. I went full time and it took me 7 years. So it's all good. Just go at your own pace. And then of course, I'm like, who's gonna hire me? I'm like old now, I'm ancient. Like I'm not gonna be able to get a job. And I think just, I think because I was just really interested in the topics I was interested in, my advisor, Chris Hoadley, encouraged me to just follow my interests. So my work was tangentially related to instructional technology. It was really about how we need to develop, these systems of social support to support young people in terms of meeting their goals in life, and it was in the context of looking at teenagers in these after-school programs where they were learning these skills around digital media with this idea of building careers and identities as game designers, etc. So that was the connection to the degree program. But I think because people just saw that these were the interests that I had and that they resonated with what was going on in the world, somehow I got tapped to, see if I wanted to do this job at Google. And so that's kind of what brought me there, just being true to my passion and maybe showing, that passion coming through. I think maybe it put me over in terms of people remembering and thinking of me for a certain type of opportunity.
All right. I would just like to jump on the train that it took me a long time also to do my PhD, much longer than I wanted it to. So that was, yes. So I started out as an English teacher. I also taught middle school. I did my work. I didn't know that I wanted to be a teacher. I got an English degree when I was an undergrad, and then just fled the country after I graduated to teach in community center in Ecuador, in Quito, Ecuador. I realized that I loved teaching. It was just something I was going to do while I figured out what I was really going to be. And here I am 18 years later. So I came back and did my initial licensure and master's at the University of Minnesota in a program that at the time this was in 2006, 2007. So at the time, this was that's where I first learned what Twitter was, right? And started to develop as a teacher at the same time that the internet was starting to become a major player, particularly in my content area. I taught secondary English, as I said, middle school and high school initially. And what I noticed is that there was a lot of people talking to each other on the internet and doing all the things that I was trying to teach students to do, only online. So I thought there might be something to that. And I also noticed that after I went back and got a secondary reading licensure, that my students who were the toughest to reach in all respects were the easiest to engage in discussions about games and, graphic novels, TV, movies, all of that kind of media stuff. And so but I noticed that as it was almost like an inverse correlation, right, between the level of excitement that my most disengaged students had for these things and the level of marginalization that their interests experienced in academic settings. And so I thought, this can't stand. So I went back to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. I also had small children at the time. They were 3 and 1 when we moved into Eagle Heights, which, by the way, that's one of the best moves I've ever made in my life. Eagle Heights forever. In my second semester of graduate school, I had a bunch of stuff happen to me. Number one, I realized that what I was really talking about wasn't exactly literacy focused. It was it was connected to new literacies, but what it really was the creative design and informal education area that we have in CNI. And at the time, I took a class with Kurt Squire, who's now at UCI, and and he was like, you know, I think maybe not wearing shoes at the time, like, you know, in class, like, and he was like, you know, I think maybe you want to do this. And I said, I think I do. So, so I switched my area and my advisor to Erica, and the rest was history. Also, at that exact same time, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and ended up undergoing breast cancer treatment throughout my entire PhD, which just was a huge life-changing thing. And I really had to get pretty clear on what I wanted to do afterwards. And also, if like I wasn't really going to have a lot of time afterwards to live, like, would I still stay in my PhD program? Like, what would I change? And I know everybody's in that constant process of discernment when they're in their PhD, but mine got thrown into really, really high relief. Anyways, so I'm 5 years out. I've been exited from my oncologist. I'm well. I'm now trying to figure out like how to live on a longer timeline since I had gotten used to living on something that I felt was going to be really short. In my last year of my PhD, I did a soft entry into the job market and applied soft entry. Like I was supposed to apply for like 3 jobs. I applied for like 40. And I got an academic interview and was offered an academic position. And when I had gone into my graduate school work, I had thought, you know, I didn't want to be a researcher. I really just wanted to like go and prepare teachers and like have smart discussions and things like that. And this was at like an R3 institution in 2019. And I turned it down. And I was like, I think I kind of want to maybe see what this research situation is all about. So after I graduated, I was fortunate to get kind of a hybrid postdoc administrative position in something called Creativity Labs at UC Irvine with a researcher named Kylie Pepler. And then the pandemic happened. I defended my, so like, sorry, my story is long and crazy. I defended my dissertation on February 7th, 2020. And then I had a job and I put my whole family in a U-Haul and towed them across the country in June of 2020 to California, where I then worked from a bedroom in California for like 2 years. With Kylie, and it was really wonderful work. I was doing, I was looking at some participatory co-design work with an edtech startup, where they were looking at how teachers used a voice-enabled natural language processing device, which is interesting. And I thought briefly after that was going to be over of going the edtech route, but I missed kids. And so when this job came up at the Comic-Con Museum, and it's a brand new museum, there was no existing program. It's situated within 12 other cultural institutions in Balboa Park. I had studied partnership work in my dissertation. I had built an RPP, and I just thought, oh, gosh, I can't miss it. And so in the process of negotiating for my job, I made sure that I had what I needed in order to continue my scholarly work. And I don't know, here I am doing this. So far, it's so good.
Amazing stories. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. I look almost sound like you guys need to like write books that have a biography. So we only have 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get to talk about what are some of the aspects of the PhD program, not just the coursework, but the research projects and the relationships you built along the way, and how those aspects prepare for what you do currently? And were there any surprises, like the things that you were not prepared after you finish your PhD? And if that happened, how did you learn or develop those skills that are required for your current position?
And I can start us again. I think that the thinking about what you're going to be doing, what you love to do after your position, always with flexibility, is important. So as I think about the position that I have right now, there are a lot of things that really help me. I mean, the coursework is impressive. Like at least at the university here at UW, I really appreciated having diverse professors of diverse backgrounds, because then I saw diverse research. I came back, I mean, Dixie kept talking about age. I'm super old also. And I came back as an older undergrad and then an older graduate student. So one of the things that I feel like I miss myself, because I was working full time and taking courses at the same time and having a family and all that stuff, is those connections. The people that you're connecting. So the idea of cohorts, or the idea of people in your program, being very intentional about creating those connections, because you don't know, like in 10 years, 20 years from then, everything it's a big world, but it's also a very small world. So I think those connections and doing meaningful work, I think close connections happen when you're doing the meat and the heaviness of the work together. So is there an opportunity to do research together? That's something that sometimes if you go into an academic work, like you're always being prepared to excel yourself. So it's very hard to know how to collaborate in an academic way. So how do you write papers together? How do you decide on questions? How do you decide on resources? How do you decide on design? That's very, very, very unique. And if you're going to go into a place like WCR where everything is self-funded, going for those grants, people who are not faculty, you have to fund yourself 100%. So knowing how to write those grants is important. So if I don't get that through my program, are there other places in the university where I can get that? So I think that you need that combination of being able to write, to teach, serve, thinking about ARA, AAAL, depending on what your area is, that's where your connections beyond the university are going to happen. So those are my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I can just echo the grant writing is critical. Whether you go into academia or not, that's definitely a skill that has been really important, not only for producing grants and chasing funding, which is likely to be part of your post-PhD life in some way, but also being able to read a grant critically and look at what people are proposing to do with you is really, really important, particularly in my new position. We're kind of high profile, so we're receiving a lot of interest, which is wonderful. But as I'm building a program here, I have to be very discerning in, how I maintain our mission. So highly recommend apprenticing yourself in the grant writing process, regardless.
I'd say just another big shout out to a writing group, and like really having one that's like not a soft offer. Go to the writing group. I had a great writing group. Emily was in my writing group. And we meet regularly. I still have in my calendar, like, because it was just so automatic. It came up every you know, every time we met, that I still kept it. So it still like rings. This is like 4 years later, still rings. And it helps me like think about if I'm doing something totally different that feels very divorced from my PhD process. It's like, oh, this is when I would sit and do writing. Like, this is when I could come back to that. And it really like brings me back to like, oh, you know what, maybe I should write something, or maybe I should think about, like, it just really puts me back in the mind of that. And if, especially if you are deciding at this point that maybe the faculty tenure track or academic track isn't for you, and maybe you've like done the super dangerous thing of tell someone about that, that you really advocate for still being included in things. I think that it's very easy to, once you sort of like slip up and say that you might not want to be a professor at an R1 institution, people can sort of put you in a lane, and then you're not invited to do the cool project. You're not, you know, the first one top of mind to do something, because, you know, I think that people are trying to really lift people up in the profession they're in, right? And so once you sort of said, I'm not sure, no, thank you, you could be counted out for those opportunities. And I would say you are just as deserving as everyone else who is in that game. So putting yourself in there, saying, I'd like to be a part of that. I'd like to do that. Count me in for that, and advocate for yourself. I think that is like the biggest difference between my graduate level work in my master's and my PhD was like, PhD is on your, like, you have to want this. Like, you have to want this. It's no one's going to say, of course, sort of come after you and be like, I'm just wondering if you're going to turn something into, the deadline is nope, like the deadline is what it is, and you have to do it. So it's really sort of put it on your calendar, tell someone in your writing group that you want to be doing it, so you have like an accountability partner, and go for the things that your colleagues are going for. You are every bit as deserving to get that opportunity as someone who is in the academic track.
I'll just talk a little bit about sort of my PhD program and now my job at Google. I would say that it's a very different culture. I think in my path was kind of particular in terms of I think I happened to again, I had a social network. I really I happened to be very lucky to meet all sorts of people. People helped me. Michael Levine was a big help. Then later on, I started to work with his nephew, Rafi Santo. You know, it just seemed like, and now whenever people want to get connected to others, I always point to Michael Levine, Rafi Santo. Rafi's how I met YJ. You know, so all these things I think were really helpful early in my career. Being in the tech world, it's its own kind of world that seems disconnected from the previous world I was in. So now I'm drawing on different, skill sets and different things that I need to hone. But one thing that has been consistent is an ability to take an ambiguous question and to not be afraid of it, break it down, create a framework. You stand out a ton when you can do that in any job. And I think a PhD program really helped me be comfortable with that. And I also think that Google talks about, hiring specialists, but I think the people who can do well and thrive are people who are generalists. So all your years of experience, that is actually, it behooves you that you've seen different, you've been in different domains. You've learned specialty language. You're not afraid of their language. You're like, fine, whatever you're calling it. Tell me what it is, and then now I kind of know what you mean, right? And I think that kind of approach actually is really helpful. So yeah, that's sort of that. I don't know. We can talk more about industry if people want, but that was some things that kind of came to mind.
Great advice for sure. Like very briefly, like what are some words do you have? You guys already share a lot of wisdom based on your experience, but if you have like a hashtag, right? For like through Twitter, although Twitter is going down. What are some words of wisdom you like to share with our students as they're finishing their PhDs?
I feel passionately about this. So if you think about what you want to do all day when you pick your job. So, there's a lot. I thought I wanted to be a professor because I love to teach, which I do. And I will probably at some point in my life find myself, teaching in some capacity, right? But what I love what I do all day, every day, even though it's frustrating, even though, I've got, you got colleagues that you're like, what's going on with these people? The whole deal, despite all the frustrations, I thoroughly enjoy what I do moment to moment. And I would recommend that you think less about the title you want to have and more about what you want to do all day long.
Emily?
I would say welcome feedback. The more feedback you get, the better. And you are in a safe spot right now, or a relatively safe spot right now, where people are hopefully generous to provide you with feedback. But in my experience as someone who is an instructional coach by trade, who's sort of positioned in a hierarchical form that doesn't receive feedback, but I don't receive enough feedback. Like, I am always looking for feedback loops, like give me feedback, like honest feedback. Education is a place where there's a lot of nice people, who want to give you a lot of nice feedback. And I think you're on a call on a Friday afternoon. You're not here to be nice. You're here to be better at your work, right? And do your work as best as you can. So I think be the kind of person who opens up to feedback, who's excited. It's so much easier to receive feedback when you know it's coming. That it's that surprise feedback that can be really hard. So set yourself up to receive feedback, extend feedback to your colleagues and friends. And be kind of that feedback beacon. I think that will help you serve you in so many ways, and help you practice how to respond to all sorts of feedback.
I think for me is learn to say yes to opportunities that you feel will fulfill you, and also learn to say no to opportunities that you feel are going to distract you. I think I learned how to say yes a lot and not no enough. And I've learned from every single opportunity, but you don't have enough time. So if you want to have any sort of balance, you really need to focus your yeses and your nos. That's one. And the other thing that I wanted to say really quickly is I remember when I was about to defend my dissertation, I was like, how am I going to do this once I graduate? Because right now I have a whole group of people who are giving me awesome feedback. Claire, when you were talking about feedback, that's what made me think about it. And it's not true. What you have right now is opportunity to create those connections with all these fantastic scholars, so the better connections you have, those people will be, I can't remember who said, Erica was my advisor for life. And it's not just your life, but it's also for life. Those people will continue to support you. I mean,
Sure.
those are great relationships. So keep them, make them and keep them.
Dixie?
Everyone basically gave you all the advice. Every time I tried to think of something new, then someone would swoop in and say it. So I don't know, a forefront of my mind right now is obviously Google has gone through a huge, massive layoff. This was my first layoff. It has kind of renegotiated my relationship to my work. And I think that's just something to just keep in the back of your mind wherever you go. It's about what you want to do, what you want to accomplish in the world, the change you want to make. Maybe it's, where you are is where you can do it, and maybe not. But, just always keep in mind that, you have other resources around you. get your feedback, build your relationship, know exactly what you want to do in life, take those risks and find out a way to kind of go in the direction that you want to go in. So I think a lot of people, Google, especially, you get sucked into the day-to-day, and a lot of those people that gave a lot of their time and energy to Google, woke up, on Friday morning to a rude awakening. Imagine just not realizing Thursday night what Friday would bring. So I think that's just something to just keep in mind. And it's, I think those stories are out there. You can read about them on LinkedIn and other places. So, just something I wanted to maybe some unique thing, but I loved all the feedback and all the advice prior to this. Really, really great stuff. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate how candid you guys have been and how you're so willing to be vulnerable. I really appreciate that, and I think it's so beneficial for our students to hear that this is life. It's not just a job, and we are handling a lot of things. It's not just finishing PhD. So I think it's just having the perspective. It's so valuable, and just hearing your stories just make me cheer up a little bit. We only have like 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure that our students have opportunity to ask you guys questions directly. So any CNI students who are here, if you have any questions for any panelists, oh yeah, we only have 10 minutes, sorry. Unmute yourself, turn your video on, and ask questions away.
Well, Ajay, I don't see any other questions here in the chat, but I do have a question for our panelists. The shift into the virtual work and the virtual world that we live in as an outcome of COVID, how would you suggest that today's graduate students try to navigate that, where a lot of our engagement is virtual? So like in this space right now, we're meeting all of you, and how would you suggest that we follow up with you and then engage so we can create those relationships that are gonna move us ahead into the next step of our careers?
I love to talk, I'm sorry. But I think that actually one of the things that pandemic has allowed us to see is that virtual spaces actually help us, bring us closer together. One of the projects that I was working in was about discussion, meaningful discussions, deep discussions, engaging in learning. And then the pandemic happened, so we had to shift. And one of the things that we saw is that when you do it well, when you do it planful, when you do it, it actually provides a space that is very unique, as long as you don't try to recreate what happens out in the real world, So I've been able to connect with mentors, at UC Boulder that are on the other side without having to travel. And before I was like, oh, when am I going to be able to talk to Dr. So-and-so? So I think that for the relationship building, it's much easier to say, hey, do you have 15 minutes? Do you have 20 minutes to talk to me? And do it online. It's much more effective. You just have to be planful, because it's not the same. It's not going to be the same type of relationship. So it's not instead of, but it's in addition to all the other opportunities we have to engage in communities of practice, etc.
I would also say, if I had to do it again, there was like this kind of cult of celebrity that I definitely had around like senior academics when I was in graduate school. And I would advise you, if you have that, just like do whatever you have to do mentally to try to break that down. These are just people. So like just email them and say, hey, what's up? I like your style, and maybe I could catch you for a Zoom coffee and just, listen to you, like, particularly if they're working at public universities, like that's part of the gig. And I also think like I would like contort myself, like I'm going to be at this conference, I'm going to go to this panel so that I can shake hands with this person and then they'll know me. And like, don't do that. Just email them, send them an email and say, hello, I am a student. I am trying to also contribute to the body of knowledge that you contribute to. Got any time to say hello? And they're going to say, no, I don't have time, but maybe contact me in 6 months in the summer, right? And then just keep up with them. The professors in this conversation are like, yeah, great, Emily, thank you very much for that. Now that, but it is part of the gig. And similarly, we all put our emails in the chat. So I'm saying, do that to us too.
To piggyback on what Emily just said, I think that the pandemic has afforded us a lot of, there's a lot of like webinars and free labor on the internet that whereas it was harder to find, a professor or an academic talking about their work, and so now you can do some of that beyond just something that they've published, but something that they're talking about. And I think it goes a long way when you begin a conversation with like, I saw you here, or I heard this, or like, this is something I'm trying to bend your ear about. It's much easier to answer a specific question that someone has than sort of like I'd just love to hang for a little bit. So specificity, I think, is helpful, specifically if you're emailing.
Thank you all.
Sarah, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. This is informative to everybody on the list. So my question was about grant writing in proposals. Where did you get those opportunities to learn how to write that? Because I feel like I'm almost close to the end and I don't have any idea how to do that. Thank you.
You learn by doing. So one of the things that I would suggest is, I don't know how much more time you have at the university, but CCR has always like openings for graduate students, and you join a team and then you can see a grant cycle wherever you come in. And sometimes you might miss when they were writing the grant proposal, but you see part of the research or part of the closing or part of the reporting. And then there are multiple grants starting and going. So if you're in your first, second year, join a group, that's a great job to have. A second way to do it is there's always opportunities for grant writing, and some of them are very small. Some of them might be a grant for funding to go to a conference. AR has tons of them. Another grant might be like, a grant for using data from a particular certain centers. Research centers have data, like AIR has data that they share. So going for small grants or going for larger as part of a group is always useful. Every time you write a grant, typically they will send you back feedback. In that feedback, try to go for that grant again and fix this feedback, and then you keep building your skills. It's kind of like writing a paper. You write multiple times, and sometimes they say no thank you. Sometimes they're like, oh, actually this was good, we're not going to take this, but here's some feedback. So nothing like doing it, and start small and look for other people to collaborate with.
I see your hand up, Berku. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Borju. Thank you a lot. I'm a dissertator, and I really needed to hear from different kind of jobs. One question that I have is, there's a general view that to try academia first, because if you try something out of academia first, it is really difficult to get back to academia. So I was just wondering, did it scare you? Or, how did you handle it? Or what is your comment on this general view? Thank you.
I think I can answer this question, actually, although you did ask me. As someone who started as an academic, so after I graduated, I wasn't ready. I didn't feel like that I want to become a professor, and thinking about the thing that I like, and professor didn't sound like my kind of thing. So I was actually in non-academia I would say 6 years after I graduated, I was in a startup scene. I worked as a research scientist, but not really like publishing. I was working as a designer. I was a director at some point. But what I want to say is that is the kind of the story that you hear most times, that unless you started as a postdoc and assistant professor, then you never come back. But I think increasingly I see more, people like me who, work in industry years and then come back. And I think there are different ways that you can navigate. So if, again, like I really like Emily's advice, like think about what you like most and do that. And if later, if you feel like, well, I want to be a professor now, I think there will be ways. So I would say just don't follow everybody's rule, create your own rules to figure out your own career.
I would also say you could go backwards too. Like, I mean, I teach a graduate school course. Like, it's very, again, like you've made those connections through academia that there's nothing to say that you can't teach a grad school course in the spring semester, while you're still working your other job, and which is really exciting. And I would say and argue that you're bringing a whole different perspective to the curricula and syllabi by whatever you're doing in your day job, to be able to support the institution. That way you're bringing a different perspective that's really valuable.
I would say also one of the things that I've heard is if you want to keep that door open, keep doing the work that you want to do and try to publish. I've known people who have been out of academia but have continued to publish and engage with others. And then when you go in some cases, if of course, the people that I know have been big shots that they don't have to go through the tenure process, or they have a decreased tenure process because they've published so much. So I don't think that necessarily have to do it all if you continue to be visible, and what people are looking for you is to extend that line of work. They want to see that you've developed your line of research.
I would also jump in to say, and Emily prompted me in the chat. Kathy Au suggested to me in my graduate work to like sort of find almost like a pace car, like find a friend in your program who you admire the way they work and the pace at which they work, and sort of try to think about, they published something. Maybe maybe I should submit something. Maybe I should to answer a call. Right now I'm working with Language Arts Journal on a recurring column where I'm taking sort of a study and then making it really, really actionable and relatable from a coaching perspective on supporting literacy leaders as they take one of those, one of the pieces in each segment or each edition, and really think about how they could make it work in their buildings, and that really connects me to my colleagues, and connects me to being a writer, an academic writer, which is something that I could easily be like, oh, I don't do that anymore. And it's just as hard as it was when I was writing my dissertation, and it is something that takes a lot of time and thought, and but it's something I'm committed to. It's like a muscle that I'm working to be able to continue to be sort of in both places.
Thank you so much. This has been great. I cannot believe it's already, we're at time. So unfortunately, we have to let our panelists go. But let's give a round of applause to our lovely panelists and their amazing stories that they share with us. Thank you all for joining today. And I hope we see you guys again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining.